Runeterra is a world of magic, war, and ancient powers that most of its inhabitants barely understand. These 10 champions do not barely understand those powers. They are those powers, ranked from the ones who could destroy the world with effort to the one who built it and is reconsidering. Let's break this down. Mordekaiser. He has already died 3 times, and each time he came back with more. The champion known as the Iron Revenant was once San Uzal, a warlord of a forgotten age whose brutality and ambition were so absolute that when he died, his soul refused to leave. He reached out from death, convinced a coven of sorcerers to resurrect him, and then destroyed the sorcerers the moment they had completed the ritual, because Mordekaiser has never allowed anyone who held power over him to remain in a position to use it. His second death produced the same outcome. His third death led him not back to the living world immediately, but to the construction of his own realm within death itself, a personal dominion in the spirit world where he rules as its absolute sovereign, bending the dead to his will and building an army that no conventional force in Runeterra has the capacity to address. He once imprisoned Vhagar within a fortress specifically because the Yordle's magical potential interested him, not to destroy Vhagar, but to use him as a tool, which communicates something specific about how Mordekaiser views power. He does not seek to destroy Runeterra, he seeks to conquer it, and then conquer everything beyond it, which produces the same outcome for anyone who inhabits the world and is not Mordekaiser. His goal is dominion at universal scale. Destruction is simply the method. Viego. His grief is still spreading. The ruined king arrived in Runeterra's present not through invasion, but through the specific emotional catastrophe of a ruler who could not accept his wife's death. Isolde's passing, driving Viego to search for any means of resurrection, his pursuit of that restoration bringing him to the Blessed Isles and the sacred waters he believed could bring her back, his failure producing the event known as the Ruination. The black mist that now emanates from the Shadow Isles is the direct physical consequence of Viego's contact with those sacred waters. His corruption spreading outward as a tide of dark energy that transforms everything it touches into spectral horrors bound to his will. The Ruination, in its most concentrated form during the war for the Ruined King storyline, came close to consuming the entire world. The black mist reaching across continents, corrupting champions across every region of Runeterra simultaneously, the spread requiring the combined effort of multiple champions to halt. Viego was defeated in that confrontation. The black mist did not stop. It receded, which is a different thing from stopping. A tide that has gone out rather than a threat that has been ended. His connection to Isolde, which the Ruination storyline revealed as more complicated than simple grief, gave him a personal anchor that the lore suggested could either save Runeterra or doom it depending on how that connection was eventually resolved. The world came close to ending because a king loved his wife too much to let her go. Vel'Koz. He destroys everything he studies because studying it requires complete disassembly. The void entity known as the Eye of the Void operates from a singular directive to gather knowledge about the physical world for the Watchers, the ancient beings who wait beyond the void for their moment to unmake Runeterra entirely. Vel'Koz's specific mechanism for knowledge acquisition is the total disintegration of whatever he is examining. His biophotonic plasma breaks down matter at the fundamental level, reducing anything he investigates to its component particles, while the data encoded in that matter transfers to his consciousness. He does not destroy things carelessly or maliciously. The destruction is the research methodology, and the research is everything. Champions who have encountered him describe the experience as being studied rather than attacked, which is accurate in the sense that the attack and the study are the same action. His accumulated knowledge from millions of years of examination includes information about virtually every form of matter, energy, and life that Runeterra contains, which the Watchers require before they can execute the final Void incursion with the precision needed to ensure nothing survives it. Vel'Koz is not the threat. He is the preparation for the threat. Every piece of knowledge he sends back through the Void is a step closer to the moment the Watchers judge their information sufficient to act, at which point the question of whether Vel'Koz specifically could destroy Runeterra becomes irrelevant because what follows him would not leave the question open. Xerath. He absorbed an entire Ascension ceremony and has been accumulating power ever since. The Shurman mage who would become Xerath was born a slave, a child sold in Noxus who made his way to Shurima and spent years earning proximity to the Emperor Azir, specifically because proximity to the sun disk meant proximity to the Ascension ritual that Xerath believed would liberate him from every limitation his birth had imposed. When Azir called his friend into the Ascension chamber, Xerath betrayed him, triggering the ritual before it was complete, absorbing an ascension that was not designed for him, transforming from a human mage into a being of pure arcane energy contained within a prison of ancient stone. The containment was necessary. Without it, Xerath's power radiates uncontrollably in every direction. The raw magical energy that his body now generates is sufficient to annihilate anything near him at a sustained output that he maintains simply by existing. His ambitions have not diminished with his transformation. He seeks to remake Runeterra according to his vision of a world where the strong rule through magical power rather than birthright, which in practice means dismantling every existing structure and rebuilding it under his authority. His conflicts with Azir, the emperor he betrayed who was himself brought back from death by the Ascension, have produced the franchise's most powerful ongoing magical confrontation, two ascended beings whose conflict has already destroyed Shurima once, and shows no sign of producing a resolution that leaves the surrounding geography intact. Cho'Gath. He grows every time he eats, and he eats everything. The void creature known as the Terror of the Void operates on the simplest possible drive, consumption. And the specific horror embedded in his lore is that his consumption has no ceiling. Each creature, structure, and entity he devours makes him physically larger and more powerful, which means every victory he achieves increases his capacity for future victories in a compounding cycle that the game represents through the feast ability stack mechanic, and that the lore extends to genuinely staggering scales. His Runeterra biography describes him as originating from the void, the manifestation of the unknowable nothingness that exists beyond the physical world, the force of insatiable hunger that the Watchers have been cultivating since the universe began. He is not attacking Runeterra with plans or strategies. He is eating it at the pace his current size makes possible, and his current size is something the lore does not put a ceiling on. The void incursion that Cho'Gath represents is not an invasion with objectives. It is a biological process operating at a scale that most of Runeterra's defenders have not been forced to confront, because Cho'Gath's full activity occurs primarily in the void-connected regions rather than across the populated world. The question of what happens when his eating reaches the populated world is one the lore has not resolved because the characters who would resolve it have not yet been forced to do so. Zoe. She has been watching long enough that the distinction between watching and participating has become unclear. The aspect of Twilight, the cosmic force that chose a mischievous Targonian child as its herald specifically because of her joyful irreverence in the face of danger, gave Zoe access to dimensional travel, time traversal, and the ability to collect spells and artifacts from across space and time and deploy them as weapons. She witnessed Mordekaiser's rise and fall. She was present for the destruction of the Blessed Isles that created the Shadow Isles. She saw the establishment of Ixtal and the creation of civilizations that the present population of Runeterra has never heard of. She has existed across a timeline so broad that the events which define the current age of the world are, from her perspective, recent developments in a story she has been watching since long before the current cast of characters arrived. Her power, as a direct combatant, is genuine. The aspect's capabilities amplify her natural chaos into something that dimension hopping makes nearly impossible to anticipate or contain. But her specific threat to Runeterra is less about destructive capacity and more about what happens when a being with her temporal scope decides something needs to be addressed. The aspect of Twilight chose her because her irreverence made her unpredictable. The universe has not fully accounted for how unpredictable that actually is when the irreverence is pointed at a specific problem. Fiddlesticks. It existed since the first screams of creation. The being known as Fiddlesticks, the first of the 10, the ancient fear, the primordial demon that the League of Legends lore describes as older than any other demon currently present in Runeterra, does not have an origin that the world's historians, scholars, or mages have been able to document with any accuracy. The stories about it vary by region and contradict each other at every point except one: the fear. Whatever form Fiddlesticks takes in any given location, and it takes different forms across Runeterra, adapting its appearance to match the specific fears of the population it has moved through. The fear it generates is not a side effect of its presence, but the literal substance of what it feeds on. It is not a creature that causes fear. It is fear, given form, that causes creatures. Its classification as the first of the 10 kings of primordial demons places it at the beginning of a demonic lineage that predates the civilization that names things, which means Fiddlesticks was present before Runeterra had a name for what it was experiencing. Its current awakening, Aurelion, having been sealed and returned from that seal, positions it as an active threat to a world that has largely forgotten what the first of the 10 actually meant when it was last awake. The stories about it became folklore. Folklore made people afraid. Fiddlesticks fed on the folklore's fear. The seal breaking was not an end to a story. It was the beginning of a new feeding cycle. Bard. He sealed an entire region inside an ice crystal to stop something worse from happening. The Wandering Caretaker's relationship to Runeterra is not personal. He does not live here, does not belong to its factions or care about its political boundaries, and his visits to the world are not motivated by affection for its inhabitants. Bard is a cosmic entity whose purpose is the maintenance of universal balance, a being of incalculable age who travels across dimensions addressing threats to the fundamental order of existence before those threats compound into something that cannot be addressed at all. His specific lore engagement with Runeterra involves the collection of magical artifacts whose unchecked presence creates the kind of imbalance that escalates. The incident in which he sealed the city of Brookstone inside a magical stasis, trapping everyone inside it in a frozen moment to prevent a catastrophe he had calculated was coming, was the franchise's clearest documentation of how Bard's priorities operate. The city's inhabitants were preserved inside the crystal rather than killed, which means from Bard's perspective, the action was compassionate. From the inhabitants' perspective, the distinction between being frozen and being destroyed is a matter of definition. He is ranked here not because he wants to destroy Runeterra, but because the scale of threat he is calibrated to address suggests that the things Runeterra considers its most catastrophic events register on his timeline as the kind of local disruptions he notices in passing. What he is traveling between those visits to handle is not a question the lore has fully answered. Kindred. Every living thing in Runeterra will eventually see them. Kindred is not a Grim Reaper, and the distinction matters. A Grim Reaper escorts the dead, which implies an operational role that exists in response to death. Kindred is death, the concept itself given form in the League of Legends universe, which means their existence is not a response to mortality, but the mechanism by which mortality functions. Lamb and Wolf are the two halves of a single entity. Lamb offers a peaceful death to those who accept her. Wolf hunts those who try to run from death until the running stops. Every being in Runeterra, every mortal, every spirit, every ascended, every champion of any faction will eventually encounter Kindred. The only documented exceptions are entities who operate outside the standard categories of existence, and the lore has been careful to qualify those exceptions rather than confirm them absolutely. Aurelion Sol created Kindred, which is the lore's most specific statement about their cosmic status. The being who builds stars made death, which means death was something the universe required to be built deliberately rather than something that emerged incidentally from the presence of life. Kindred's threat to Runeterra is not active. They are not planning anything, not accumulating power, not pursuing a goal. Their threat is structural. Everything that lives in Runeterra will end. That end is not something that can be negotiated, resisted, or escaped. Kindred is the reason that statement is true, and they have been the reason since before anyone alive today was born. Aurelion Sol, he said it directly. I created life on this planet. I can take it away as easily. The Starforger, the oldest entity in the League of Legends universe, predating the physical world he now travels through, has been shaping the cosmos since before Runeterra existed as a concept. He builds stars. The process of star creation, sustained over an existence that the lore describes as beginning with the birth of the universe itself, has produced a being whose casual actions operate at scales that make planetary destruction not a feat, but a byproduct. His capture by the aspects of Targon, tricked into wearing the crown of command, which compelled him to circle the mountain and serve the aspect's purposes against his will, was the event that converted the franchise's most powerful entity from a neutral cosmic force into an active grievance holder. Aurelion Sol spent an indeterminate but functionally enormous period of time serving beings he considered vastly beneath him, circling a mountain on a planet he considers cosmologically insignificant, and his freedom from that obligation has left him with both his full power restored and his full contempt for Runeterra's inhabitants operating without restraint. The updated lore around his re-release positioned him as someone who has spent millennia calculating exactly what he intends to do with his freedom, and who is in no particular hurry because time operates differently when you were present at the beginning of it. He created the stars. Runeterra is a planet near some of those stars. The gap between those two facts and the question of what happens if he acts on his stated position is the most significant unresolved tension in the entire League of Legends universe.